Those joining us in Zoom, please note that due to our hybrid environment, audio and video presentations can no longer be shared from the lectern. Requests to show an audio or video presentation during a meeting should be directed to epci.mountainview.gov by 4:30 p.m. on the meeting date. Additionally, due to our hybrid environment, we will no longer have speakers lined up to speak on an item. Anyone wishing to address the EPC in person must complete a yellow speaker card. Please indicate the name you would like to be called by when it is your turn to speak and the item number on which you wish to speak. Please complete one yellow speaker card for each item on which you wish to speak, and then turn them in to the EPC clerk as soon as possible, but no later than the call for public comment on the item you are speaking on. Instructions for addressing the commission virtually may be found on the posted agenda. Now I will ask the EPC clerk to proceed with roll call.
Commissioner Subramanian?
Here.
Commissioner Pham?
Here.
Commissioner Gutierrez? Commissioner Dempsey?
Here.
Commissioner Cranston?
Here.
Vice Chair Donahue?
Here.
And Chair Nunez.
Present. Here. Okay.
All commissioners present with the exception of Commissioner Gutierrez, who is absent.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Okay, we'll move on to item number 3, minutes approval, of which there is none. So we will then proceed to item number 4, oral communications. This portion of the meeting is reserved for persons wishing to address the EPC on any matter not on the agenda. Speakers are allowed to speak on any topic for up to 3 minutes during this section. State law prohibits the commission from acting on non-agenda items. If anyone in attendance would like to provide comments on non-agenda items, please fill out a yellow speaker card and provide it to the EPC clerk. If anyone on Zoom would like to provide a comment on non-agenda items, please click the raise hand button in Zoom or press *9 on your phone. Phone users can mute and unmute themselves with *6. Mr. Clerk, do we have any speakers?
There are none in person and none on Zoom.
Okay. All right. Seeing as how there are no speakers, we will proceed to item 5, public hearing with 5.1, below market rate housing program zoning code updates, being the agenda item for the night. We will first have a staff presentation, then questions by the EPC, followed by public comment. At the closure of public comment, the commission will then deliberate and take action. So we'll begin with a staff presentation from our housing specialist, Ana Reynoso, and affordable housing manager, Julie Bernard. Thank you.
Good evening, Chair and Commissioners. My name is Ana Reynoso, and I'm a housing specialist here at the city. This evening, I am accompanied by Affordable Housing Manager Julie Barnard and Housing Director Wayne Chen. This evening, we will be presenting on the ordinance amendments to the below market rate program, also referred to as BMR. This evening's presentation will be divided into 3 main parts. We will provide some background, which includes an overview of the current BMR program, along with the BMR review process. The second part of the presentation is focused on the 7 proposed amendments to the BMR ordinance. Finally, we will conclude with next steps. The city's BMR program was originally adopted in 1999 and underwent its first major update in August of 2019. The BMR program refers to inclusionary units that are integrated within market rate developments, not projects that are 100% affordable housing. Some key components of the BMR program include any residential project that creates 7 or more units must include on-site BMR units. Projects less than 7 units are subject to a fractional in lieu fee. BMR units are set at different area median income, also known as AMI levels, and are required to be comparable to market rate units, and BMR units remain affordable in perpetuity. Under the program, developers may pursue an alternative means of compliance, also referred to as alternative compliance, in place of providing on-site BMR units. For existing BMR tenants, the maximum allowable rent increase is capped at 3%. The city's Housing Element Program 1.9 requires 2 reviews of the BMR program. The first review was completed in December 2023, consistent with the required deadline. The next review will be completed in 2028. The December 2023 review included the 5 evaluation criteria in the housing element as outlined on the screen. The review concluded that the BMR program is effective in increasing the supply and diversity of affordable housing. Council approved the recommendation to further study specific amendments based on the housing element criteria and bring back recommended amendments for additional discussion prior to the actual ordinance amendments. The ordinance amendments are implemented in a 2-phase process. Phase 1 of the ordinance modification process was completed in February 2025, where EPC and City Council held public hearings and approved the first set of BMR ordinance updates focused on Criterion 5 cleanup items. Phase 2 took place in November of 2025. City Council approved recommended amendments for the remaining housing element evaluation criteria based on the direction given in the December 2023 study session. The remaining 7 amendments will be discussed in detail this evening. The first amendment focuses on the second housing element evaluation criteria, improve physical accessibility of BMR units. After further study, it was found that approximately 13 to 18% of low-income households in California have a physical disability, and that existing state and federal building codes already require extensive accessibility features in designated accessible units. It was determined that adding local accessibility requirements beyond those standards is difficult due to need, cost, and limited administrative capacity. Developers indicated additional features would need to be optional and incentivized, though some developers voluntarily include adaptable units that can be modified later. In November 2025, Council supported staff's recommendation to require 15% of the BMR units, or 1 unit minimum, to be accessible. This approach improves access to BMR housing without imposing additional local requirements. Amendment number 2 adds requirements that an applicant must meet if they propose alternative compliance rather than building integrated on-site BMR units. These changes provide greater clarity for applicants and require applicants to provide comprehensive information necessary to more effectively and efficiently review a development application for compliance with the BMR ordinance. Based on council direction, the November 2025 meeting, the general requirements being made include keeping land dedication and off-site development of BMR units on the list of allowable alternative compliance options, adding acquisition preservation of existing housing units to the list of alternative compliance options, clarifying that alternative compliance applies to both rental and ownership projects, the value of an applicant's proposal be no less than the value of providing the units on site. The applicant must contribute financial resources to facilitate the proposal, providing city oversight if the applicant proposes a partnership with another entity, and developers must submit a complete below market rate compliance plan as part of their development application. Before reviewing the first compliant option, it's important to note that it incorporates lessons learned from previous city projects, which help to inform the development of these amendments. Secondly, when evaluating a proposal, staff will use the in lieu fee to measure equivalency between the alternative compliance option and providing on-site BMR units. The amendments to the alternative compliance approach addresses direction given by council relating to housing element criteria 3 and 4. With land dedication, there are no proposed changes to the current requirements. The amendments include adding location requirements to integrate AFFH criteria, a feasibility and financing analysis which demonstrate the project's alignment with the in lieu fee equivalency and identifies any additional developer contribution. In addition, there's also a cost recovery fee based on the cost analysis of city resources and staff time the city undertakes in a land dedication which spans several years. The amendments relating to our second alternative compliance option Off-site development have been informed by city projects such as 777 Middlefield and 685 East Middlefield. For off-site development, the location requirements align with the updated standards discussed in land dedication. One of the new standards that has been added includes access to amenities. That is, if the off-site development does not include equivalent amenities and it is within 750 feet of the primary project, the off-site residents must be granted access to shared amenities, such as a pool or gym at the market rate site. Currently, off-site development includes a 20% requirement. The amendment is reducing this to 15% to better align with the on-site BMR requirement. Currently, alternative compliance for off-site development does not include an affordability term. This amendment proposes aligning the term with our current BMR requirement of in perpetuity, except in cases where financing restrictions prevent it. Often projects such as these involve multiple funding sources, each with its own requirements, so the amendment builds in flexibility to work with applicants. Most of these projects are undertaken by mission-driven developers who typically seek to maintain affordability well beyond 55 years. Another new requirement is for the applicant to provide a feasibility and financing analysis. This analysis will give the city assurance that the alternative compliance aligns with the in lieu fee equivalency, clarifies developer financial contribution, and confirms that no additional city funding is required. In the situation where the applicant opts to partner with another entity for off-site development, the applicant would need to outline what the partnership may entail, any financial contributions they are providing, the terms being offered, and the process for the partner selection. The city will have some level of oversight over the developer partnership to ensure the terms align with the program requirements. If the developer opts to secure a partner through an RFP, the city shall review the RFP to confirm compliance. The amendments also revise the delivery timeline to include a provision that if the offsite development is not completed, the developer must comply with the 15% BMR objective standard. And now I will pass it on to Affordable Housing Manager Julie Barnard, who will present the remaining BMR ordinance amendments.
Thank you, Anna. Our third and final alternative compliance measure is acquisition and preservation. So the city does have one existing example that these measures have been modeled off of, and that is 660 Mariposa. In order for an acquisition preservation project to be eligible, the acquired sites will need to be on a different site and also not subject to existing deed restrictions. The locational requirements align with the other two alternative compliance approaches, with the addition of CSFRA units being eligible. The affordability levels, I skipped ahead. A developer will need to demonstrate how they meet the rehabilitation and physical needs standards through providing an assessment of the existing conditions, the improvements that are required, as well as those rehabilitation costs. The affordability levels must align with the BMR program. The acquisition preservation project must meet the same number of bedrooms that would have been provided on site, with the caveat that studios have a half a unit value. Staff recognize that this might be challenging for a developer to secure a building that has an exact match of bedroom and unit sizes, and therefore will allow a developer to exceed the number of units that would have been required, but at a 1.5 times threshold. So this will provide the program with flexibility while also balancing the unit sizes. The first four standards here align with those that were discussed in the other, in offsite development. So if the acquisition preservation project requires relocation assistance, the developer or the applicant must remain consistent with the city's TREO provisions. Finally, both projects are to receive their certificate of occupancies concurrently. Council accepted all of staff's recommendations. For the third amendment, staff were instructed to review the in lieu fee escalator index, which is currently CPI. Staff found that the California Construction Cost Index would be the better index and therefore recommend making this change. In doing our due diligence for the acquisition, for the alternative compliance, we revisited the in lieu fees and we have some updates. Although construction costs have increased, incomes which drive rents and sales prices have increased at a far greater rate over the past 5 years. So therefore, you will notice that 2 of the fees have actually just decreased. Conversely, non-row home and townhome ownership projects, such as condos, have seen construction costs increase faster than sales prices, which means that the gap between the construction cost and the revenue has increased, and this results in a higher fee. So council accepted these recommendations. The fourth amendment addresses the remaining cleanup items that were not incorporated into the February 2025 update. These include clarifying the weighted average for the AMI limits and updating the administering department from CDD to housing. Council has accepted these recommendations. The Fifth Amendment addresses the HOA Reserve Fund. Currently, our ordinance requires that any developer that is providing units at 80% or below establish a fund that would cover increases in HOA fees for households that may be experiencing financial hardships due to the fee increases. Since this was adopted by the city in 2019, the state has passed Assembly Bill 572, which restricts an HOA increase on deed-restricted ownership units to 5% plus CPI, capped at 10%. Additionally, staff have received feedback from developers that the HOA Reserve Fund impacts project feasibility for low-income home ownership units. Staff conducted an analysis and have found that AB 572 is generally sufficient to meet the intent of the HOA Reserve Fund, and that the benefits of this fund do not offset project feasibility. So therefore, staff recommend removing the program, and council was supportive of this recommendation. Amendment number 6, a graduated fee reduction. As mentioned earlier in the presentation, the BMR program allows projects up to 6 units to pay the in lieu fee. Once a project reaches 7 units, a full BMR unit must be delivered with the project. During the November 2025 council review, staff recommended incorporating a graduated fee reduction for small projects, meaning that the more units a developer builds, up to a maximum of 6, the lower the per unit fee. The intent of this initiative is to incentivize developers of small projects to maximize their development potential, as well as to further Housing Element Goal 2.2, which is the pilot ADU and SB9 financial incentive program. The graduated fee reduction could maximize the use, or maximize and incentivize the use of SB9 and achieve incrementally more new housing supply than without the graduated fee reduction. At the November 2025 City Council meeting, Council passed a motion recommending that staff analyze 2 actions. The first action was to analyze adjusting the graduated fee reduction to work proportionally with the maximum number of units physically possible for a project. In order to determine how to calculate this, staff recommends using the base densities allowed under the general plan and zoning designations, as well as the provisions of SB 684 to establish the maximum legally allowed density. The graduated fee reduction would then be scaled proportional to the number of units that are legally allowed. This approach retains the original intent of the greater the density, the lesser the fee, but then it customizes the approach to site-specific densities. This table compares 2 scenarios, the first being a project with a legally allowable maximum density of 6 units, and the second with 4. As you see here, the graduated fee reduction scales accordingly with the number of units that could have been built. To illustrate, if the developer has a site with a maximum density of 6 units and opts to develop only 4, they would be required to pay a fee of $8,855 per unit versus paying no fees if they were to maximize the density. The second action was to evaluate the feasibility of incorporating the graduated fee reduction with maximizing the development potential of small sites up to 10 units and return to council with options. Council directed staff to review projects of up to 10 units because there are state laws that allow by right subdivisions of up to 10 units under SB 684. Staff conducted a preliminary evaluation and have determined that additional analysis is required. We propose doing this through the low and middle income homeownership strategy, since projects of up to 10 units are often oriented towards ownership models, and also to return with options during the 2028 BMR review. Our final amendment amends the ordinance to allow BMR program, updates to the BMR program guidelines to occur administratively rather than requiring a council resolution as currently written. This is also consistent with other guidelines throughout the city. Council accepted this recommendation. As a reminder, these are the 7 general topics that the EPC is considering this evening. EPC's recommendation will be presented in the ordinance's first and second readings in May and June, respectively, and this results in an effective date of July 9th, 30 days following the second reading. You may notice that there's been adjustment in the council calendar since the original EPC report was published. So staff recommend that the EPC recommend council adopt an ordinance amending Chapter 36 of the Mountain View City Code as it relates to the BMR program amendments as discussed in this presentation, and also find that these code amendments are not subject to SECRA. So this concludes staff's presentation. We are available for questions, and we can turn it back to the chair.
Thank you. All right, we'll take it to the commission for questions. Let's see if anyone wants to hop in the queue. Commissioner Dempsey.
Thank you, Chairman Nunez. So, a few questions. And this is getting back to one of my favorite topics, the density bonus law. I'm interested in how that interacts with some of the changes that we're making here. So let me just go through and hit a couple of these amendments kind of one by one. So under Amendment 1, if I understand it correctly, one of the changes that we're making is that a specified number of the units, or a particular ratio of the units, have to be disabled accessible in a way that regular units are not. Is that correct? Okay. Is that waivable under the density bonus law as a concession?
Yes, I believe it would be.
Okay.
But they would have to use one of their incentives or concessions. So they're usually limited depending on the project's provision of the BMR units, so that we would require that they use one of their incentives and concessions rather than a waiver.
Okay, and incentives and concessions are limited by number, waivers are unlimited? Is that, remind me how it works.
Yeah, waivers are unlimited,
Okay.
and then incentives and concessions are limited based on the number, like the proportion of their density bonus that they're requiring.
Okay.
It's like a sliding scale.
How do you determine what is a waiver and what is a concession? Who decides that?
It's a great question. So a waiver, and maybe I can also help the city, ask the city attorney to assist, but a development waiver usually waives the development standards. So put simply, think of something that's like physically possible or impossible to build, versus an incentive and a concession is more like driven by your financing.
Okay. Okay, so under Amendment 1, that could be a concession.
Yes.
That could, okay. So for number 2, similarly, the requirement that an amenity has to be shared with an offsite. So if there's a swimming pool at Site A and then the BMR gets put over to an offsite, Could the developer request as a concession that,
No.
tell me about that.
Because a developer couldn't use an alternative compliance and the density bonus. They have to be, to provide their density bonus, they have to be providing inclusionary units. The intent of the alternative compliance is that they're not providing the units within the building. It's being removed and being delivered in a separate way to comply with the city ordinance, not a state ordinance,
Okay, so
the state legislation.
so the use of an amenity on site by off-site BMR units, that's not waivable?
No, not under a density board.
Oh, okay, good. All right, that's good news.
Yeah.
Similarly, the perpetuity of the deed, that is waivable, is it not? They could come in and say, it's too expensive to have it be in perpetuity, we'll give you 35 years.
Commissioner Dempsey, I can jump in here. So the difference between concessions and incentives and waivers is that a waiver can be used when a development standard physically precludes development at the proposed density. So think of open space requirement, and not specific to affordable housing, but an open space requirement or a setback requirement, something if they stuck to it, they couldn't necessarily achieve the density that they are entitled to. Whereas an incentive or concession is a development standard that's reduced or not applied because because of financial impacts to the affordable housing that's being provided. So if a developer comes in and, they don't have to show a pro forma, but if they tell the city this requirement has direct financial impacts to our ability to provide affordable housing, then they're entitled to use their concession or incentive to change the development standard as it applies to that project.
Okay, and I don't plan to belabor the point. I think it's just important that as we're going through and we're talking about how do we make the BMR ordinance better, I think it's important that we remember that these are increasingly advisory, and that we shouldn't necessarily expect that it'll happen in every case. If we're doing something that we think is good, a developer could easily come through with density bonus law and say, well, that's kind of expensive, I don't want to do it. And then we have to say, okay. And that's just something I think is important to keep in mind as we go and as we take on some of these changes. The second question that I have is not on that. It's actually related to the last recommendation, the one that staff does not recommend we take, and it's switching in the switching code. It's the place that we were talking about putting it, I think, in Treo.
Chapter 46.
Yes, changing the chapters. Mm-hmm. The thing I was surprised by is there is no discussion really whatsoever as to why we don't think it's a good idea. That we say it could expose the city to potential challenges that would not arise if the BMR program remained in Chapter 36. There was no discussion in the memo that I recall. There was no discussion in the staff proposal. I just kind of want to nerd out a little bit on why we think that's not a good idea.
Good evening, Commissioners. Wayne Chen, Housing Director. So we did conduct some analysis. We consulted with City Attorney's Office, and it was more of a sort of a risk prevention measure. There's not a lot of examples of this where a city has moved it out or kept their BMR ordinance outside of the zoning code. Most cities have it within the zoning code. And it was more of a, if we moved it outside of the zoning code, would it expose a city to challenges to say we couldn't implement the provisions? And so it was more along those lines. It wasn't too much more detailed than that. But part of the reason of moving it out into Chapter 46 was perhaps making it easy for developers to find all the relevant housing codes, but we can certainly achieve that by just pointing them to Chapter 36 and Chapter 46. So that's primarily the reason to rather not expose us to a potential issue rather than move it for sort of streamlining and consolidation purposes.
Okay, so the intent originally was make it a little bit easier to navigate, but to the extent that it would raise a technical the potential for technical legal challenge because it got moved out of one chapter and into another, the risk wasn't worth the benefit.
Correct.
Okay, good enough for me. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner Dempsey, Vice Chair Donahue.
Actually, multiple of my questions were just asked. So, but I do wonder, the accessible units, are they only available to people with physical disabilities, or are they generally available to everyone?
Oh, that's a great question. I think usually they would be, it would depend on the applicant pool, and it also depends on, it's not an exact science. It is sometimes hard to align like a reasonable accommodation. Right, Anna, you're going to have to help me with this one. Anna's our expert at things like this. But they would be available to an interest list with a preference for those who have a need for the fully accessible
I mean,
units.
sometimes, like if I go to a hotel, the last unit to be rented is the last
Right.
room available is the accessible unit. But yeah, okay, I think I understand. That makes sense. Another question is this affordability being required in perpetuity unless a funding source requires otherwise, right? It's a requirement, not a funding source says it only needs to be accessible for 55 years to get this funding, but if somebody that's a floor, not a ceiling, and the city would require the ceiling, right?
Right. So tax credits for at the federal level, I think are about 30 years, with the state level being a minimum of 55. We obviously don't want to stand in the way of any, well, it's not the tax credits necessarily themselves, it's the investors and the finances on the other side of those tax credits that may have different regulations. So our preference would be in perpetuity, but we wouldn't want to prohibit any developer from securing their financing. So we would just align with that, knowing that 55 years is always going to be the floor. Okay. What happens is usually around 55 years or sooner, a developer will resyndicate their loan and come in. At that time, we would extend it. So often, fully affordable housing developments end up being affordable in perpetuity anyway, because we just continue to extend the regulatory agreement.
Oh, it's like you get a mortgage and you just refinance your mortgage and that kind of thing.
The term keeps going, 100%.
Going.
Exactly.
I see. Okay. Okay, that's all I have. Thanks.
Thank you. Commissioner Pham.
I had a few questions. First question had to do with the alternative compliance measures. The ones that were listed to me are very different from each other. So land dedication, offsite development, and acquisition and preservation of existing housing units. Does staff have a sense of what of the options would be more popular or likely to occur versus others? I know it's hard to know, but I was just trying to understand a little bit about the context of why these three were chosen and how likely they would be.
I can take a shot at this. I can tell you the trends that we've seen in the past year or two is that we have seen 2 alternative compliance measures with off-site development, at least 2 projects. But in the past, the city has received a few land dedications also. So introducing the acquisition preservation provides a path for developers to expand the portfolio of options, but so far those 2 have both been successfully used, with most recently 2 off-site developments being popular.
All right, thanks. I have a follow-up question. Kind of has to do with, I recall in November, Council had questions about timing of each of these alternative compliance measures. Because they're so different to me, I think the question was really valid. If you're working on your project and you're trying to also do some sort of means of alternative compliance, the timing may not work out completely. And council had asked staff to figure out if there could be some variance or some administrative leniency. Was that considered?
Yes, and I think we were also requested to do that through the administrative guidelines. So that will occur through the administrative guidelines, and we agree as staff we wouldn't want to prohibit a good player or a developer that's showing good faith progress in their project. We wouldn't want to stand in the way of something like that getting developed. So yeah, it was a good suggestion.
Okay, great. My last question had to do with the BMR Housing Fund. It was good to get a description of that. I just want to get a sense of how much of the in lieu fees that were mentioned go into that fund, how much that fund is, and how that funding is ultimately used by the city.
Our in lieu fee fund, or are you talking about the HOA?
The BMR Housing Fund. I'm
Oh.
looking at the ordinance. I think it's section
Oh, right, okay.
36,
Do you have a
40,
sense?
40.
Wait, are you asking about our fund balances or just like our general cash flow? Or like,
Kind of both, just to get an idea of how much has gone into this fund over the years from the in lieu fees, and then how.
do we have the information on hand? Okay, if you'll give us a minute. We'll take a look.
I can provide maybe just some high-level context for that. Wayne Chen, Housing Director. Over the past 10 years, I believe we've now added over 1,000 affordable housing units, fully affordable, to the city. So we have about 1,700 units, and I believe we've provided about $150 million worth of funding, which is a combination of BMR in lieu fees, which have been a primary source, as well as our housing impact fees. So I think as Ms. Barnard is looking at potential breakdowns, the number is quite high. It's tens of millions of dollars of BMR in lieu fees have been collected, leveraged for these 1,000 units.
Thanks. The
Okay,
context
so
is really
actually,
helpful.
we do have a number for you. Since the since the BMR program was implemented in 1999, the city's received $118 million in fees.
Thank you. In general, how are those fees used, and what's the decision-making process behind that?
Well, our fees are used in a number of different ways. Most of it, I'd say the lion's share of it, is loans to developers for affordable housing projects. We do have other things that are drawn down from, like staff costs. We have other programs like some of our, what do you call it? So I'm sorry, I'm struggling with my words right now. Other housing programs, such as we're looking at the low and middle income home ownership strategy, that we could potentially fund some of the acquisition preservation projects that we are implementing through. Wait, I think Wayne, you may be able to speak to our speak to that $4 million that we had allocated towards acquisition preservation.
Sure. Ms. Barnard's right. The vast majority of the funding is for 100% fully affordable new construction projects. There's been a small allocation of $4 million for our Community Ownership Action Plan Acquisition Preservation Fund, and we're looking to potentially leverage the funding for more home ownership opportunities as well. So mostly new construction, some acquisition preservation, some home ownership.
Thank you. It's great to have the context of, the size and scale of this program.
All right, thanks, Commissioner Pham. Commissioner Subramanian.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to my colleagues for asking some of the questions. Certainly helped to clarify it. I understand that at the directive of the council, the intent is to remove the in lieu fees going forward and to replace it with these other alternate compliance methodologies. So it's actually interesting to hear about the context of how much in lieu fees has been drawn in over the years. And per my understanding, I understand that in combination with the impact fees that are drawn in, go to serve the city's sources of providing gap financing for many affordable housing projects. So I'm a little struck by the fact that we are going forward, and I wondered if there was a thought about how some of that financing, which might have been received through in lieu, will be now offset through other sources. Maybe it's a question for Director Chan.
Yes, thank you very much for the question. There is certainly a trade-off. In part, the BMR program is seen as an alternative mechanism for delivery of units without the city needing to be involved or the city needing to invest in it. But yes, there is a trade-off, and we've been very successful about using BMR fees over the years. We have been, through Ms. Barnard's work and staff's work, of applying for external funding grant programs over the past several years, and we've been quite successful at that. We have some funding allocation for some recent ballot measures at the box, Measure P and Measure G, and the Housing Department gets some allocation of that. And we continue to talk about external partnerships and funding partnerships as well. So the hope is that we are still able to deliver 100% fully affordable projects that include some city financing, and separately through a different mechanism to have affordable units delivered through the BMR program.
Thank you. So could you maybe provide an explanation of what the calculation methodology is for the in lieu fee? Because I read about the fee amount being a sum off or a difference off the cost to develop the BMR and the economic value. What is the economic value of a BMR unit?
Do you mean the equivalency or the economic?
So could you maybe just elaborate on how the in lieu fee is calculated?
Okay. The in lieu fee is really the delta between the revenue that a developer may receive after the unit is filled, they're getting rents or they've sold the property, versus the cost to construct. So let's say hypothetically the cost is $500 per square foot, and that would equate to hypothetically $100 in revenue. The fee would be $400. So it's the delta between the revenue they would get and the cost. So the purpose of that is to assume that a developer is made whole, that the fee itself isn't going to incentivize or disincentivize them from providing the units on site.
And I think later on in the report you had a table, was it table 5? That lays out the in lieu fees. Mm-hmm. Is there a comparison of how this compares with other jurisdiction, or do you have an understanding of that? So there's a table, in table 5, there is a BMR in lieu fee which lays it out for rental, ownership, and other ownership units.
This one?
Yes.
Yeah, that's the one.
So what Ms. Barnard was describing is what we've been calling the equivalency methodology, which is to set the fee at a level that would be economically equivalent for the developer to provide the units as a way to help encourage the delivery of the units. Based on our landscape analysis of surrounding cities, most cities do have per square foot fees that are lower than that. The other cities do not use an equivalency methodology, but rather some other methodology, and usually they're set at levels that are often quite a bit lower than the actual cost of delivering the units. And the notion of having it be equivalent is that if we were to receive fees, we would be at a deficit to make up for that amount if the fees were not set at equivalency as well. So for that purpose, and for the purpose of making the decision of whether to move forward with on-site or propose alternative mitigation to make it a more neutral decision, that was the methodology that was taken back in 2019, which still applies.
And I guess by pegging it to the CC CIs, it will continue to sort of keep up with market pricing.
Yeah, it would be, we believe, a more reflective index based on what developers are actually facing.
Thank you. Sorry, my next questions are on, you include a list of options for siting, both in a land dedication as well as an offsite or preservation strategy. I was wondering why you may not have included like a housing element site in the list apart from the other options. Would that make sense to include just so it also goes to fulfill our housing?
Do you mean for the locational requirements?
Yes.
Oh, they may already be included in the general high opportunity areas, and I can bring that up and you'll see.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if the high opportunity areas always coincided with the housing element site inventory that we have.
So I'm not exactly sure where all the housing element opportunity areas are, but I did want to show you the slide that reflects the HCD opportunity areas, high and highest resource areas, which is essentially most of the, almost all of the city, apart from maybe one little parcel there. So really our AFFH requirements are very easily met.
Yeah, that's helpful to know. So under land dedication, can you explain what happens to a dedicated parcel? Does the city take control of it and maintain it over time? And is the cost of the maintenance then calculated in that sort of financing that the developer provides? And for what period of time is that envisioned?
Right. Excellent question. So the land would be conveyed at some point in time that we would establish through the compliance plan. It's conveyed to the city. Depending on the parcel, I'm not entirely sure about what that maintenance might look like. But if a developer opts to give a land dedication, they also need to provide the city with the fee, which currently is about $950,000, which covers the cost of the RFP process, the developer selection, the entitlement, how long we anticipate it takes them to get financing, all the way through construction. So currently, as it stands, we would receive a fee. The city takes title to the land while we secure a developer partner.
I was wondering if it might make sense to have an option to do a conveyance to a community land trust, which will also sort of help maintain the perpetuity of the affordability and maybe reduce some of like the carrying costs for the land.
So I think what you are referring to would closely rather mirror an off-site development rather than a land dedication to the city. So that's a possibility through the other alternative compliance measures to partner with a community land trust or another entity that could then build it and maintain it like you're mentioning.
Okay, and next question. Under the preservation option, what exactly is meant by CFO or like for an existing property that you're trying to preserve?
That would be your certificate of occupancy. So that's really the end of the improvements. So tenants would move out, the improvements on site would occur, and once our building department goes in and says, great, everything's good, that's your certificate of occupancy, and tenants can move back in.
So the reason I asked that question is I've seen opportunities where perhaps buildings are in a state of being able to be occupiable right away with the idea of going after financing sources that might be available in the future and having a phased improvement program to update the occupancy. So I was wondering if there was consideration for a more nuanced strategy such as that to be applicable without it being a day one rehabilitation and improvement that needs to be done to an acquired property?
I think I understand what you're saying. I think that would be something we would need to work with the applicant through their proposal, through the compliance plan. We would want to make sure that they've gotten to a stage of completion within their project that we feel like they've satisfied their requirements, or they're working in good faith to satisfy those requirements. But similarly with as I mentioned earlier, and as we discussed, that we would want to not stand in their way of project completion, but also make sure that it's getting complete. But we would work with them through their entitlement process on items as such.
So it's something that can be sort of described in the administrative guidelines,
I think so.
which Commissioner Pham touched on earlier in terms of the time period. Okay. In Table 6, what was the fee? What was the base fee based on for how that was calculated for like the single?
Table 6, the graduated fee reduction?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we'd had to make some assumptions for illustrative examples. And here we assumed a unit size of 2,000 square feet, which was roughly the average size of the units when we receive fees.
But is there a set in place fee per square foot?
Yes, the table that I had up earlier with the, we have an in lieu fee per square foot, and then you times that by 2,000 square feet.
Okay. Got it. So you had said that staff is continuing to analyze the feasibility of looking at projects with 7 to 10 units. As part of that analysis, have you been able to analyze the number of parcels that fit into that 7 to 10 unit capacity range?
Yes, we did make a start. The data is incredibly difficult to get your hands around without it's like substantial review and data cleaning, for example. Like let's say you pull a GIS data set, it includes a number of things that aren't parcels and that sort of thing. So that's why we needed additional time to review, to at least evaluate the number of parcels that may be eligible for at the 7 to 10 parcel size, project scale. I think we did take a look at the number of projects that the city has seen in that range, and there's only about four in the last, since 2015.
Okay. Well, I think it'd be helpful to have that data just so we could sort of also put in place the guidelines to address those sites quickly.
Yeah.
Those were all my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Cranston.
Okay. First one wasn't a question before. Did you say that under the land dedication and offsite, the base project would not be eligible for density bonus?
Yes. The purpose of the alternative compliance is if a developer does not want to provide the BMR units integrated into their market rate project, they can utilize the alternative compliance. So you wouldn't be doing both. You wouldn't have a density bonus and a alternative compliance measure at the same time.
So the hypotheticals that my colleague mentioned about these things going away wouldn't apply in those kind of situations because they wouldn't be density bonus eligible anyway.
Correct.
Okay, that's interesting. Can you put the high resource thing back up there? I felt that was you should include that in the documentation to provide to council, because I felt like it was a big gap as I was looking at this. So one of my questions was, I kind of got the south of El Camino as the AFFH, but is there any place that's not AFFH, that's not high resource area? The reason I asked is it felt like it was adding something into the criteria that was basically a double count. And I kind of questioned something that specific, including in there. So was the inclusion of south of El Camino specifically said, okay, because of the AFFH, we have to do that? And then we said that in the housing element? It looks like everything south of El Camino is in the highest or high, except whatever that park is, I don't know where, the little blue spot.
I can provide just a little bit of context too. That south of El Camino is part of another housing element program. I believe housing element program 2.6, which is related to affirmatively furthering fair housing. And one of the goals or objectives under that separate housing element program is to facilitate affordable housing developments south of El Camino. So we thought this was a good opportunity to specifically connect that separate program opportunity to the alternative mitigations, locational options there. And so, yeah, I think the HCD opportunity area is broader. It has, it does cover a lot of the areas, and then pulling in south of El Camino was specific to another housing element program.
Okay. And the inclusion of the El Camino Precise Plan? Why was that?
Yeah, that was as we were evaluating that separate program and in coordination with our planning colleagues, that south of El Camino and El Camino Real Precise Plan is a really key transit corridor, and we thought it would be opportune to include south of El Camino and El Camino as part of opportunity areas for folks, especially as we're looking to do more sustainable transit-oriented development.
So El Camino
And if I
Precise
may
Plan.
add, the housing element program says south of El Camino, so a portion of El Camino Real Precise Plan does include the southern portion of the city below El Camino Real itself.
But El Camino Precise Plan was there more for the transit component of it? Is that what you're saying?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that question?
So the inclusion of the El Camino Precise Plan was because of the fact that it's a more heavily utilized transit corridor?
It touches on part of the actual south of El Camino, but then on the north side of El Camino is also part of the Precise Plan, and that one was probably more along the lines of this is a really resourced area because of the amenities and the transit infrastructure.
Okay. So don't get me wrong, I like the high resource area. It felt I didn't go back into the whole housing element, but it felt like, damn, this covers pretty much everything. Why is this other stuff here? Was kind of my reaction, and without a map to look at, it was kind of hard to do that. So I really recommend you include this in the council report, because they may have the same question on it. The next question, so when you do something that has a partner, does the city have a veto over the partner that's chosen?
No. We have the ability, if they issue an RFP, to review the RFP, but we have no authority to prevent a partnership at the end of the day.
Is that a legal issue, the city attorney? Part of my question is, I am familiar with projects up in San Francisco as well, and there are below market rate housing developers who are basically crooks, okay, and have eventually been banned from things by the city of San Francisco. And it would be, I wouldn't want to have somebody come in and bring in a partner that we look at and says, well, these people are crooks, so we don't want them. It seems odd to me that we wouldn't have some ability to say, well, you know what, we're not approving them as a partner.
I think I would defer to the city attorney. I think we have
Good evening. Can everybody hear me? This is Jennifer Logue, the city attorney.
Yes, we can hear you, Jennifer.
Excellent. So the question you're asking is a complex question. I think it would depend on the city's role in the project, if you are talking about a strictly private development project and they wanted to work with a partner, I don't think the city would have any authority to prevent a particular partnership. If the city was providing some sort of funding for it, if it was affordable, 100% affordable housing or something like that, the city obviously has more of a role in that kind of development project. But if we're talking about a strictly private development project, I'm not aware of any authority the city would have to prevent a particular partnership.
Okay, clarifying question. So if this is moved, so the move to make this administrative is not changing regulations. This is, I thought this is something that we would still ultimately have to approve. So there is a discretionary component of this the city is taking on by allowing the off-site compliance option that we would be able to review. And so we could choose not to approve that option if they bring in somebody that doesn't look like they're going to be a good partner, wouldn't we? Because we're granting this as an alternative, and that we can just say, no, we're not going to accept this alternative. Couldn't we?
Yes, I believe the city has the discretion to reject the alternative compliance proposal. But that's not, I mean, I guess the question was, can we reject their proposed partnership? I think yes, the city could reject the alternative compliance proposal if we didn't like the partnership, I suppose. But that's sort of an end run around the question. We can't just say you can't partner with that person, but we could reject the alternative compliance proposal.
So that's, okay, so yes, we could do that if we included that as a component of the plan. Right now, it's not a component of the plan.
Yes, to the extent that we have reserved full discretionary authority to accept or reject an alternative compliance proposal, but to the extent that it is objective criteria, and we've laid it out and said if you meet 1, 2, and 3, then the alternative proposal shall be accepted or approved, then we would we are depriving ourselves of discretion. But if we have reserved full discretion, then yes, we could reject the proposal because we didn't like the partnership.
Do we have that right now, or do we have to change it to do that? As proposed, do we have that full discretion?
I have to defer to staff. I don't recall.
So under the current program, it is set up to be discretionary. The intent of these modifications and clarifying the requirements is to make it more by right, but there's more information that needs to be filled out. What I wonder, as a way to kind of respond to this inquiry, perhaps maybe a recommendation by the EPC would be to maybe add a provision under the partnership that they would need to demonstrate that the partnership or the partner is a qualified developer or some such. And we have some framework around that, but perhaps adding that type of provision would give us more ability to have oversight and determine whether the partnership is qualified.
Okay. I have to think about how to word that, because I understand what you're saying. If charges have been filed and there's a court case in another jurisdiction for somebody, I would be reluctant to adopt that partner in Mountain View when they're under something of litigation. So I'll try to word my recommendation later. I'll think about how to do that. Something that was in the part of the response to my other colleagues was on the timing of things. So I understood the timing for offsite development, but on land dedication, is there any requirement that something's built and put in place at the same time as the other project, or is it just here's the land and there's no timing associated with it?
There's no timing component for the completion of construction. There would be a timing component for the conveyance of the land. And I would imagine that that would be at a maximum once they start construction once they pull the building permit for the underlying site.
Okay. So maybe the director knows this, but what's the typical time from when we have land until we actually find a partner, go out there, put something in place, and we actually have something built? I mean, we have stuff that I know we've approved. It's still sitting there as vacant lots multiple years later, and it seems like on land dedication, it could be a really long time before something is actually turned into units.
Yes, thank you. That's right. We have two examples right now. We have Lot 12 across the street, which took several years to have the developer get all of its financing. Construction's about to start any moment now, so we're really excited about that. We have another project that is 87 East Evelyn, and that is occurring at a much faster rate. It is taking about 3.5 years, but that's pretty quick. But typically, when we have a land dedication, it takes us a process to go to council to determine priorities for the site. So that's one process. Then we would issue a request for qualifications, request for proposals process. That can take 9 to 12 months, and we've tried to identify ways of streamlining it. And then once the developer is selected, then they have to go through their process of entitlement and pulling their funding together. And so that is one of the main reasons why BMR on-site is so desirable. But in this option, it would take usually 3 to 5 years to have a project get off the ground.
And in that calculation of the carrying cost, are you assuming that 5 years we're sitting there on that land until something happens?
I believe we've estimated a 5 to 7 year amount of time where staff has to actively either drive the project or manage the project or fully initiate the RFP process all the way through the construction financing and construction completion.
Okay. Next one. Walk through how it would work with a CSFRA unit. I read through this multiple times, and I came away thinking, okay, so we've got a brand new building on an empty lot, and they're going to basically buy something that's a CSFRA unit, and we're not actually getting any more units. We're going from new units and BMR units and versus something and CSFRA units. And my colleague here may know more than me as to the equivalent value of a CSFRA unit versus a BMR unit, but it came away thinking, well, do we actually get anything more if we do that? So how do we actually get more units if they choose a CSFRA location that they're going to acquire?
Yes, so I think council is interested in adding this third option because of the success of 660 Mariposa. That was delivered by Prometheus in satisfaction of their BMR requirements at the Tillery, which was on Villa Street. I think the other interest that the council had was separately, we have a tenant displacement response strategy, which has an acquisition preservation component. So there was an overlap of goals as well to, first, there was a 660 Mariposa project, and second, there's an overall acquisition preservation desire to preserve and not have existing naturally affordable housing get lost. And so part of the modification of the alternative compliance is that we couldn't necessarily require a greater benefit, but the benefit needs to be no less than the on-site units. So if a developer acquired a building that maybe provided more units just because that was maybe a building that was available at the time, that might be one way, and it made sense for the developer to pencil that project. But otherwise, we wouldn't require, say, more acquisition preservation units than would have been required on site for the BMR units, but it couldn't be less. There is a requirement to have the developer do a physical needs assessment, make make appropriate upgrades as needed. So that will help at least bring various amenities and features of the units to modernize it, and making them as desirable as possible, and kind of close the gap between a new unit versus a renovated unit.
I'm familiar with, I was involved in the original proposal on that, the Prometheus project. I thought the lot was basically almost ready to be condemned, that it had substantial violations, and it was, they either needed to tear it down and rebuild it or something. So it was, quite frankly, it may have been classified as a CSFRA unit, but my recollection was that it was basically not valuable at all as it was.
The 660 Mariposa project. We had toured the site. You know, it was an older building. That part is true, but there were tenants already living, and it remained an ongoing concern, an ongoing operating project. There was some temporary tenant relocation to make some extensive modifications and bring everything up to speed. But I don't recall anything about the project, that CSFRA building having sort of habitability issues. There were tenants there, and now all the units have been modernized. And in fact, in this particular situation, it was originally 48 units. They did convert, I think, like the sauna room and another room, and added 2 units to make it 50 units on site. So they did actually add and create 2 additional units.
So I guess the short version of the answer to the question is, if they take that approach, we may actually get no more units. If you view CSFRA units and BMR units as equivalent, and I'll defer to my colleague on that, but we could end up with nothing more than what we have right now if we treat those as the same.
Yeah, it doesn't add to the overall city's housing stock, probably. It converts a portion of unrestricted housing to restricted housing, and then it's preserving those units so they don't get lost. Those are probably some of the main public policy goals for adding this to the list of menu options.
Okay, that's my questions.
Commissioner
one more.
Subramanian, yeah, would you like to?
Thank you, Jerry. I had one more clarifying question. So in sort of listening to this discussion and thinking about the alternate compliance strategies, I just want to repeat so I understand this clearly. Is it correct to say that you are using the in lieu fee calibration to come up with what the costs would be in these alternate compliance strategies?
Yes, that's correct.
So I understand that there are state laws that prevent you from charging more for off-site units, and basically it has to be equivalent to on-site units. But it does strike me that in each of these scenarios, there's a slightly different cost factor depending on time. And, maybe the state of prevailing conditions. So is there a way to maybe create a prioritization of between the 3 strategies to say this one first, if not this, or if not this? Because it does seem like if the goal is to create BMR units faster, without having the option to do them on site, would it be fair to say that maybe doing preservation of existing housing that's at the affordable realm, or creating off-site units but building them faster is the way to deliver it? Because it does strike me that using the same equivalency for a land contribution does not necessarily guarantee the production of BMR units anytime soon. And if we're applying the same in lieu fee factor, may not even be bridging the costs to create those units in a timely manner.
I think I understand your question, but to sort of repeat it back to you. What I'm hearing is you're asking about whether or not we could create a priority order across the 3 alternative compliance. I may lean on the city attorney just to verify, but these alternative compliance measures are in response to, I think it's AB 1505, where we have to provide some alternative means of compliance to a BMR program. It's a minimum of 2. We're providing options for 3 to maximize flexibility. I don't know whether or not we have the ability within that to provide a prioritized list or what council's appetite for that is. It's not something we had actually contemplated. So I'll pause there in case the city attorney has any conflicting opinions on that.
We would have to look that up. I don't know off the top of my head. I was trying to quickly get an answer to that, but if that's something you were interested in us exploring, we could certainly do so. But I'm sorry, this evening I don't have a direct answer to that question.
Okay, thank you. I think it would be something worth exploring, just to make sure that we are aligned with the ultimate goal of creating BMR units faster and in a timely manner.
All right, I have a few questions. I'll try to ask the simpler ones or the more direct ones first. Without needing to hear too much, unless staff feels like there's a need for it. I guess I'm just curious to what extent, if it's either just yes or no, great. But to what extent, when these changes were being looked at, were we just kind of checking with the trail, making sure it was like compatible and no kind of like inconsistencies? I'm sure that's part of the process. I just want to make sure if that's the case, just get assurance. Right, like there's elements of like TRAO and BMR are both policies meant to address and support low, moderate income residencies in our city. So given that there's a relationship there, I guess I'm just curious to what extent staff explored that relationship as part of this. Maybe it's a more abstract question than I expected, but I'd definitely like to.
Well, I think the biggest overlap when it comes to the TRAO and the BMR program relates to the acquisition preservation alternative compliance. If there are existing tenants that need to be relocated, they would need to comply with our TRAO.
So for example, in a scenario where a developer says, yeah, we're going to do a total preservation of residencies and rehabilitation for some other derelict building or what have you, is there a mechanism, like for example, right? So you can imagine other similar scenarios, but related. Is there some mechanism where, for example, the city is checking to make sure that as part of that process, those active residents are in fact being, for example, given temporary housing, that they are, it's being done so within a reasonable distance, right? Like, is there some kind of like effectuating relationship between the two that was assessed just to make sure that both kind of hold up?
Yes, we did do some analysis, and then in Table 4, there's a reference to relocation assistance and first right to return, and it references needing to be consistent with the TRAO.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Other one, so if I'm reading it correctly, the on-site integrated BMR contributions have to be built concurrently with the rest of the units being delivered, is my reading of it. I guess I just want to make sure, because I think some of my colleagues kind of touched on this through the questioning, but excuse me if it just wasn't as clear in my brain, but I guess yes or no, is there a mechanism to enforce, for example, in an off-site scenario where, I don't know, or recoup even, for example, if developer builds their shiny all market rate project over here, and then said, hey, yeah, you know, during the approval process, they were like, hey, yeah, we totally commit. We're going to build this BMR, you know, building somewhere else, and it's going to have more units, and it's going to be the best BMR in the city. And then 5-10 years later, nothing's there. Is there some mechanism for controlling? Can I just hear that just really clearly one more time, just to get a sense?
Yes. So we do have a little bit of discretion to move the timeline, but as it's written, if they are not able to deliver the off-site units, they would have to integrate those into the building that they've just built, the fully.
Okay, sorry, thank you, that was helpful. And is there, just to be clear, there's a time frame on that, or it's not as prescribed, or?
So there is. In an ideal world, they would be receiving their certificate of occupancies at the same time. So both buildings are ready to go. They're built, ready for occupancy at the same time. There was a motion made at council that through the administrative guidelines, staff would have the discretion to adjust that somewhat if we see that the developers are both working in good faith. Like, we don't want to get in the way of a good thing, but we do have the discretion if there's been no progress on the off-site development to say, nope, sorry, you need to comply with our on-site requirement.
Sounds good. Next question. When it comes to the off-site as well, and again, if these are clear questions, apologies in advance, but if a developer constructs a market rate condo building or ownership project, the off-site, that has to be also a similar, it would have to be ownership, BMR ownership. It can't, they couldn't just say, okay, well, we're going to do rental, right?
Right.
Yeah. Okay, cool. And then next one, for the AFFH. So I think the staff report or the documentation mentioned that one of the criteria under which a alternate compliance or alternate compliance would be acceptable is if, for example, the land is in south of El Camino, right? That's like a criteria for acceptance. Is there a kind of like inverse criteria where, for example, I know not a lot of development happens in south of El Camino, but let's just say, for example, some large market rate project miraculously was going to happen in Waverly Park, where they couldn't say, well, we're going to do the alternate mitigation, or we're going to deliver our alternate compliance, but we're going to shuttle that over to Castro City. Does that make sense? So it's not that we put the alternate mitigation in an opportunity area. It's that we put, I don't know, maybe more units even, but we like shuttled the opportunity out. Am I making sense? In a very clear sense, I guess, can a developer build a market rate project in a high income area and then satisfy the alternate mitigation by putting off-site units, their allotment of off-site units in a lower income area? To what extent was that?
As long as they're meeting the AFFH high opportunity areas, as long as it was, I think, within half a mile of the other project, it's located south of El Camino, which is also an HCD opportunity areas, then yeah, they have the discretion to select a site that would be suitable for off-site development. They still have to be meeting the criteria that we have very thoroughly vetted that are AFFH compliant.
So if I'm hearing correctly, because I thought those were not ands, but ors?
No, I think
Right.
they should be and or. I mean, in many cases, they could be meeting
So could they meet
multiple
just
of
one
those
criteria?
AFFH requirements at the same time.
So they could meet one criteria.
And that would be
satisfy-
enough.
So then I guess that's kind of what I'm trying to get a sense of, like, so then exclusion means denial. So for example, if I am saying, hey, I want to build a project in a rich part of town, 100 units market rate, I have to do, I don't know, 25 of those, whatever, have to be BMR. Instead of putting them in the same building, I'm going to take those, and I'm going to tell the city, instead of giving you 25 BMR units, I'm going to give you 50, but all those 50 are in the poor area of town. Right? Like, to what, how does that get handled in this proposal?
I don't know how to
that,
better
it's the
answer your
equivalent
question other than if they're in the opportunity areas, which the opportunity areas do take into consideration a number of different things. I think the socioeconomic status of the demographics in the area, as well as like the access to amenities, access to transportation, access to it. Like Mountain View is very, very fortunate in that almost the entire city is covered by the high and highest resources. So I don't know if I have a better description other than to say I don't know that there are any parts of the city where that are just a low income and poorly resourced.
Yes, yeah, thanks for the question, and thanks, Ms. Barnard. Yeah, I think what you're trying to get at is, as currently written, there isn't something that says if you're building your underlying project south of El Camino, you actually need to also build your BMR units south of El Camino. As currently written, they could find an alternative site that is north of El Camino, but still in a high-resourced, blue-colored census tract. To Ms. Barnard's point, the city doesn't have low-resourced areas. We have, I think, maybe just a couple that are sort of medium. Overall, we're pretty well resourced. So yes, as currently written, it doesn't prevent the inverse situation of what you're talking about.
Okay, because in our housing element, on page 337, there's housing sites by share of low and moderate income households. And just to be quite honest, and I don't know if my colleagues would agree, but when I saw that HCD opportunity map, I was like, that seems complete. And if I had a role in completely missing that when we were watching or going through the housing element process, then bad on me. But for example, like Figure 99, Figure 98, that HCD map seemed extremely generous. And I think anyone who lives in our city would probably also find that to be very generous. And so, I don't know, to the extent that maybe there's a different mechanism that we can use, or I don't know if the commission has a discretion to suggest, hey, instead of just going off of that map, also using, which I believe these are official maps, right? Like with findings like Figure 99 in the housing element, or Figure 98 or what have you, right? Like to really make sure that at the end of the day, we're not just allowing developers to, meet in alternate compliance by just like exacerbating segregation is really the goal, right? Because we also have the AFFH as a requirement. And so, So I guess that does answer the question, which is right now, no, yes, but it would rely on that HCD map of opportunity areas. So, okay, cool. And then let me see if I can find my other ones. Integration required, yep, that one got covered. Offsite tenure, phasing gap amenity, okay. Last one, I think this one should be pretty simple. Just amenities, is there some kind of like indication of, in terms of the equivalency, kind of like the amenities available to residents within the offsite scenario?
I think that would just entirely depend on the amenities that the market rate developer is opting to provide.
Okay, all right, perfect. So they're tied to the market rate and then equivalency, which is perfect. Thank you so much. Those were my questions. I guess we will be then, unless there's questions hanging for the commission. Any colleagues have any other questions? Nope. All right, this is best part of each item, the public comment. If anyone in attendance would like to provide comments on the item, please fill out a yellow speaker card and provide it to the EPC clerk. If anyone on Zoom would like to provide comment on this item, please click the raise hand button in Zoom or press *9 on your phone. Phone users can mute and unmute themselves with *6. So I'll look to our commission clerk. Are there any speakers having submitted yellow cards or on Zoom?
There are 4 speakers in person.
Okay. Anyone on Zoom?
None on Zoom.
Okay, cool. All right. you want to do our 3 minutes and just make sure we're
3 minutes?
and hitting the timer.
Sure. First speaker will be Benjamin Tinkleberg.
Hi there. My name is Ben Tinklenberg. I was a long-term resident of Mountain View. My mother taught at Bubb Elementary for many years, and we could not afford to live here eventually and had to move out, which means I fully understand the housing crisis that Mountain View finds themselves in. But I'm actually here as a home builder, which is my profession now. And I've done projects in 15 different jurisdictions across the state, none with the fee burden as high as the city of Mountain View, which in reality, for the project sizes that I do under 10 units, just gets passed on to the housing costs. So in the case that we want to build middle-class units, the fee burden in Mountain View tends to be around $350,000 per unit. Not just the affordable units, but including parks fees, and those are the two largest ones. And the way I see it is that that makes middle-class units impossible to build in Mountain View because you must find a project that can support a luxury development which can subsidize the BMR requirements. But there's no world for a middle-income unit because you're adding $350,000 to every single unit that's built in the city of Mountain View. So I would say when you're considering these fees, particularly, it was mentioned that the $118 fee reduction, which is great. It's great that it's being reduced. I think it will increase housing production. But on a modest size unit, 1,200 square feet, that's going to be $150,000 in fees to the BMR requirement. And what that does is it limits the developer's opportunity to deliver middle income units. And you know, that's putting a lot of faith in developers necessarily to do that. But the laws that I'm interested in using in Mountain View in particular are the Starter Home Revitalization Act, which was SB 684 was mentioned, which incentivizes developers to build smaller units that are more naturally affordable. And when you add on the fee burden in Mountain View, those projects still become something where you have to build a luxury unit and then a smaller BMR unit to somehow make that work. And I've looked at lots of sites. I really do want to build here, but I've not found a way to make it work because the fees here are much higher than everywhere else. And I understand that there's an equivalency to delivering the unit, but I would say I would urge you to understand that these fees cause units not to be produced. And so there is like a hidden number of units that were never produced in Mountain View, exacerbating housing by lowering supply because they never happened, because the fees were so high in this city. And so when evaluating fees in general, I would urge you to look at positive ways to increase BMR production. Like my background, no one in my family owns housing. I'm not a very rich developer. So we would love the affordable units, but we would want them to become financially viable so that we can create a lot more of them through positive, not negative mechanisms.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your comment. The commission does too. Next speaker, please, Mr. Clerk.
Next speaker is Tom Tran. Okay. The following speaker will be Andre Lindy.
So just to go off what the previous person said, you can't build here. You look at San Jose, Mayor Matt Mahan asked
Sorry
how
to
many
interrupt you. I'm very sorry. Can we get the timer to go, please? Thank you.
Mayor Matt Mahan asked how many people or how many builders units were produced when they had that requirement there, and 0 were built. And why? Because they're not affordable. Builders go in and they look at and they say, can I make money here? No, I can't, so I'm not going to build here. So then what happens? People like me that want to come and move to Mountain View, they look for townhouses. They look for houses. I went and looked at a house the other day. It was a teardown. You could not live in it. There were water stains in the roofs. There were holes in the foundation. How much did that cost? $1.8 million. Who's going to pay $1.8 million to live in a house you can't live in? Okay, then let's look at townhouses. There are 3 townhouses that are about $1 million. And those are 2-bedroom, 2 baths. How's a family going to live in that if you have maybe 2 kids, right? Are you going to live in a 2-bedroom, 2-bath townhouse? No, you're not. If you want to go to a 3-bedroom townhouse, how much is that going to be? At least $1.3, $1.4 million. So cities run off revenue, right? Cities run off people going in and going to stores, going to businesses, kids going to these schools. What happens when you make it so people cannot live in your city? People don't pay revenue. People don't pay taxes. The city dies because you have made your city unaffordable. So by what the previous person has said right here, if you are making it difficult for builders to come in and actually support the middle class, who's going to move into your city? Is it going to be a software engineer that's probably making $500,000, $600,000? Yes. Is someone who's probably working at a school, working at a restaurant, are they going to come to your city? No. They just can't afford to live here. So then they have to go to Mountain House. They have to go to Tracy. And they have to commute probably an hour and a half each way. So what I'm saying, not as a builder, because I'm not a builder, I'm just someone who wants to live in your city, you need to make it more affordable for us to live here. If you don't make it more affordable for us to live here, nobody's going to live here and then you're not going to get tax money. That's what I have to say. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
And the last speaker is Jonathan.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Jonathan. I'm here speaking on the perspective of a small-scale developer who builds in Silicon Valley and also looking at opportunities to build here in Mountain View. We do believe there are a lot of great opportunities to build small-scale infill housing here, but also do have concerns over some of the policy and the language in the BMR housing ordinance. As far as the amendments being proposed, I think one of the comments I had would be really wanted to see if you guys would strongly consider adjusting the graduated fee reduction to apply from 1 to 6 to actually 1 to 10 units. One of the reasons being one of the bills we're looking at, Senate Bill 684 and the sister bill, Senate Bill 1123, ministerial lot subdivisions, they apply for sites half an acre or less and allow you to build up to 10 units. So I'm not sure where the 6-unit cutoff came from, but I think it could be reasonable to consider that adjustment. So that would be one of the policy things that I identified, and furthermore, not being proposed as an amendment, but just in the code, that's something I found a little bit different than some of the neighboring jurisdictions and a little bit unusual is how specifically row and town homes are being targeted and treated a little bit differently as far as the requirements. So they're being, we're being asked to provide 10% more than the standard project. So I'm curious to understand like what went into that. And for example, if we were to propose an 8-unit for sale townhome project, we would have to designate 2 of those units as below market rates. So given how challenging these smaller projects are from a financial perspective, I think it'd be worth considering maybe lowering that back down to 15% across the board. As like I've said, we really haven't seen that too often in some of the other jurisdictions here in Silicon Valley, but overall, another point I wanted to cover is the concurrent development of on-site BMR with smaller projects. Construction staging and logistics is always challenging. So sometimes the BMR unit is in the later perhaps phase of the project. So for some flexibility around that would be appreciated. I do understand that it's always best to deliver all the units all at once to have an equal opportunity for it to go to market or things to be worked on. But I think these are the 3 things I really wanted to bring to your attention today. And I just appreciate the opportunity to speak and all the work that you guys are doing to make these ordinances and the city overall a better place. So yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Mr. Clerk, do we have any other speakers queued up or on Zoom?
No other speakers.
Okay, and our other person didn't return. Okay. We're going to take it to the Commission for Deliberation and Action. If I could ask Commissioner Cranston I just want to check in. I presume we're going to be hearing about your the proposed addition that you were considering at some point. So I don't know if you had just clear language worked out, so we can all just kind of have that in mind as we begin deliberation.
So am I on here? I guess my recommended change would be that the city ultimately has final approval on the alternatives being proposed for the land dedication and offsite development. And it's further review that the city makes the final decision. I'm not necessarily suggesting that it's specific to The partner that's chosen, but it should be clear that ultimately the acceptance of the alternative is the city's decision. It's not something that's purely a recommendation, and I would recommend that change to the language.
All right, thank you. Can we, let's see, anyone wants to line up in the queue? It could be you again, Commissioner Granson, if you want, but anyone else, feel free. We can jump in for discussion. I just want to make sure we all had it like top of mind before, winding around. If it was going to come up eventually. Commissioner Dempsey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just since we're doing deliberation on Commissioner Cranston's point, I wanted to ask City Attorney, are there any objective criteria that would need to go along with the Commissioner's proposal to effectuate it? Or do you have everything you need to write that, and there's no potential red flags you see in how it was laid out?
Thank you, Jennifer Logue, City Attorney. I actually raised my hand because I wanted to get a little bit more clarification. I did have an opportunity to pull up the statute just in looking at the question related to whether or not we could prioritize. And the state law is pretty crystal clear that the ordinance shall provide alternative means of compliance. And so I'm not quite sure when you say that we have ultimate authority, I'm not sure that we have the authority to reject a proposal, an alternative means of compliance. The ordinance has to contain these alternative means, and they become valueless if the city could just say, we don't want it. Right? So if we have to provide them, if we have to provide alternative means of compliance, which state law is crystal clear, there has to be some objectivity to this. Because, providing alternative means that we could, for whatever reason we decide, reject is not providing alternative means at all, really. So I think I need more clarification. We have an obligation under state law to provide alternative means of compliance.
So I guess my thinking is we do have two, okay? The on-site but separate is still there. That doesn't go away. The land dedication is there, and that doesn't go away. This applies to the third option. So if if what they propose for that third option is not acceptable, they still have two valid options that meet the state's criteria. It's this third option that's new, and it goes beyond state law, that in my mind is a extra potential benefit for the developer, and beyond what we're required to supply. So that's what I'm talking about here is, I'm not saying we take away the on-site but separate, or we take off the land dedication. It's when you get into some of this much more complicated option of the third one, that it needs to be viable. And even the other two, we're requiring to provide evaluation, financial performance, how it's going to work. If those aren't completed to your satisfaction, are you saying you don't have any right to say this hasn't been completed to our satisfaction? I think you do. And so those don't go away. So that's what I'm referring to here. I'm not saying that we take away the two options that exist today and are there and available today. Those don't change. It's this third option that I'm saying it needs to include a provision that says that ultimately we can evaluate it and determine whether it's actually equivalent and provide approval on whether that meets the criteria. If not, you have these other two options that you are available to use and have been available since 2019 or whatever we put the program in place. Does that help?
Okay. It helps a little. Do you have any more, can you provide any more clarity on evaluate? I'm just a little bit concerned that we're getting into a realm of subjectivity that is not allowed these days, right? We have to provide a mechanism by which developers can understand how they can comply. So I think the housing director made a good suggestion related to, qualified developers, right? So if we're talking about a partnership and a proposed partner, maybe we could seek documentation demonstrating that they are a qualified developer or something along those lines. I think then at least there's some level of objectivity to the compliance standard, right? So if your concern is that, you don't want developers partnering with crooks or people who have been found to be unscrupulous, right, in this development world, then maybe we need to seek documentation, right, demonstrating qualifications for private development. Would that help if it was something
yes,
along
I
those
guess
lines?
that's. I guess I'm not expecting to write all the things that you have to review in order to get there. One of the things that you listed in here is the applicant must provide a feasibility analysis, the financial analysis, demonstrate that it values with in lieu fee equivalency, identifies developer contribution, the pro forma of the secured financing, no city financial contributions. The partner is in legal good standing in all jurisdictions in the state. Whatever you need to do, I absolutely agree they need to be objective. I'm trusting that my wonderful city attorney and her assistant here can go off and look at these and say, based on what you're asking, how would you evaluate those criteria? You're going to look at it somehow. You're asking for the developer to provide this. So how are you going to evaluate it before? If they're providing it and you're providing no way of evaluating, then why is it even in here for the proposal from staff?
No, we can write it, and I'm certainly not asking you to write it. I just want to make sure that I am understanding that whatever we go look at and whatever we research, we are seeking to accomplish the goal that you are trying to accomplish here. So if your focus is on, ensuring that any partner is qualified and should not be otherwise disqualified, right? We can definitely do that. We can do that and include criteria. I just wanted to be sure that that's what you're looking for. I'm not asking you.
That's a component, but you're asking for the developer contribution, the pro formas. If you review the pro forma and it's not consistent with current construction costs and things like that, you should be able to evaluate that. And that's, so it's not only those, it's all those criteria that are included in here that you're looking for, that there should be some basis for evaluating those things. Otherwise, don't ask. So you're saying that you're going to do these things? Cool. Put in those criteria. How are you going to assess it? So that's clear to the developer that these are the things they need to do and things they need to meet. Okay. You've said you're going to ask for more money to go off and do evaluation of this because it's more complicated. So maybe it's, you're going to look for the recommendation of the outside consultant you're hiring to do this work. That they come back with a specific recommendation to, on approval or changes. It doesn't mean that as through that evaluation process, you can't go back to them and say, okay, here is where you're missing. Do something about it, and they come back with something that meets the criteria. So I would expect it to not just be goes over the wall and they just get a no, yes or no, that there's a dialogue process through that, and hopefully they come back and they address any deficiencies in the proposal so that we do get there. I just want to make sure that you have the teeth in the ordinance to say, I've looked at it, here's the gaps. If they fail to close those gaps, then we don't approve the project, approve that third alternative.
Okay. If I may make a suggestion is probably the one item, for example, offsite partner, we might add a dash that says qualified developer partnership, and that might make the evaluation more comprehensive. To your point, it's very typical for us to work with the developer multiple times through the entitlement process to get the alternative compliance proposal in a place where they can bring it to council. But given the streamlined requirements that the state has now, that's why we're really needing to have a compliance plan that's completed, but it would still typically require an iterative process or talking to the developer to say, in our evaluation, it doesn't meet, we have our 30-day comment letters, we list the deficiencies, and it allows them an opportunity to modify it. So I think that's already built into our process. And if we just add qualified partnership or developer to this, I think that can really make it more comprehensive in terms of evaluation.
I'm looking to actually do it. So that's what we want. I mean, but you listen to your viable financing. So and I didn't go through and read every detail of the thing. Okay. Somehow you're going to evaluate whether it's viable financing. All right. So, those kind of things all need to be there somehow.
Success. Other commissioners? Anyone else wants to make commentary? Commissioner Subramanian.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, staff, for continuing to make progress on this very important ordinance and the changes that you have recommended here. And I think we need to really get to this soon. I appreciate the speakers who showed up in person today and shared some invaluable insights into what's really getting in the way of bringing more housing and more affordable housing, and certainly more like moderate income housing to Mountain View. And I think working on this and improving it sooner is what's really going to get us closer to that goal. And particularly with that in mind, I urge staff to really work on the graduated fee structure for the 7 to 10 units, because I do think under SB, is it 684 and 1123? Did I get my numbers right? There are going to be opportunities for smaller sites to create 10-unit residences and housing. And so I think putting that graduated fee in place sooner will really help speed up some of that production. And outside of that, I think I still think that there might be an opportunity to figure out some way of creating better equivalency in the land dedication model, because I think using the same fee structure for the in lieu perhaps doesn't envision the longer time it might take to develop just open sites, as we've seen even with the case with 2 examples. So other than that, I am in favor of the amendments being proposed today. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner. Vice Chair Donahue.
So the public speaker brought up an interesting point on the 7 units versus 10. And my assumption on the choice of 7 was that 15% of 7 is 1.05. But for something that's 7, 8, or 9, that would require between 1 and 1.5. And my reading of the ordinance is that would actually then round down to 1. Is that correct? Okay. So that seems like actually more beneficial for the developer than to have a graduated fee that would actually extend, if they wanted to build 9 units, having them, can you explain?
Well, they would still have to, a 10-unit project would still need to provide one, even an 8-unit project would have to provide 1 BMR unit on site. Any graduated fee reduction, if you want to extend it up to 10, you're now asking us to waive our 15 or change the 15% on-site requirement. So at 7 units, we need an on-site unit. If it's 8, it'll be 1 unit plus the fractional fee. So that's sort of how the math is working right now. So at 9 units, 1 unit fractional fee, 10 unit, yeah.
So today, if there's 9 units, it's 1 unit plus a fractional fee?
Correct,
Okay.
yes.
I see, okay. As usual, my fellow commissioners asked some interesting questions that got me thinking about various things. Lot 12 was mentioned as I mean, it's not really a land dedication thing, because I guess it was, the city owned it anyway, but I was on the downtown committee in 2014 when we were deciding where to move the farmers market when there were games at the then new stadium. And somebody said, oh, we can't put it at lot 12 because it's not going to be a lot anymore. And, you know, then there were subsequently 11 football seasons. And so these things kind of can take a long time, which is unfortunate, but I don't know the history of that, and I guess maybe we don't need to get into that specific thing. But another thing that I heard was essentially redlining, which concerns me a lot. I know that your scenario seemed highly speculative, so hopefully that doesn't come to pass. But that's not okay with me. So I'm not sure exactly how we can address that through this process right now. But I'm welcome to comments from other people about that. I throw these things out there as part of the deliberative process that other people please make comments that will help me deliberate. As far as other things like physical accessibility, you know, having an alternative means of compliance, you know, state law requires that. The construction cost index, I think, is actually a really good thing, especially if construction costs are outpacing normal inflation. We definitely need to be in line with that. And yeah, these other things I generally support. So I'm generally in support, but I welcome other comments. Thanks.
Sounds good. Commissioner Pham?
Okay, thank you, Chair. I am generally in support of the staff recommendation. I know it's not perfect, and I know that this has been done over multiple rounds of amendments, which I can imagine has been a lot of work. And I know that there are items in here that allude to future amendments in the future, maybe in 2028 or with some other efforts that were cited. I do like how you guys laid out you know, the clarity in the staff report showing the alternative compliance measures. I do agree with some of my commissioners that they seem very uneven. I'm not sure how to address that. It seems like we have these options, and it may be that one or more of them will be much more preferred than others. And so I'd be curious to see when additional amendments are going to be proposed in a couple years, what the popularity of these alternative compliance measures are at that point. I do agree that changing from CPI to CCCI is a good approach. In my work, we are considering some of that for some of the projects I work on, because construction costs are changing more quickly than others. I think that's all.
Thank you. Commissioner Cranston, you have your hand up on the queue.
Just two things. One's within scope, and the other one actually may not be. So I think the the chair maybe articulated it more clearly than I did, but the way the location choice option right now, and the reason I was so frustrated not seeing the map, is the reality is with the way that they're worded as one of these must be true, is the only one that has any teeth is the HCD designated high resource area. I think you would be hard pressed to find even something that's in one of the high, not the highest, but the high or the medium, that's not within a half a mile of a high resource area. So if the expectation of council is that we are trying to make sure that we're addressing AFFH and we're trying to get people on transit, by doing it as one and only item and including it as the HCD designated high resource area, something that we don't control, those are illusions in my mind. The only one that matters is the HCD designated high resource area, and we don't control that. So I guess if that was one of the things that the council looked at, then I guess it's okay. But I guess I would like to state in the record that, in my view, there is no value in including south of El Camino as this item if the intention is to address AFFH, and there's no value including the El Camino Precise Plan if the intention is to address transit, because everything is within that HCD designated high resource area. And I don't know how often they change it, but when they do, then all this is going to change. But right now, that's the only criteria that's there that matters. So I wasn't in that meeting. If that was one of the things that council thought was okay, then I guess it's okay. But I think it needs to be highlighted that given that map, there's nothing, none of the rest matter, okay? So I'll probably still support it, but because I'm assuming this is here because council said this is cool and we should include it. But that's my concern. The other thing that I'm worried about is, and the chair didn't address this, but in my mind, I don't have a method of evaluating the equivalence of a CSFRA unit and a BMR unit, and I'm troubled by the fact that if something was inclusionary, we would have the CSFRA unit and a new unit. And by inclusion and by allowing the inclusion of CSFRA units in the third option, we go to a situation where there's no additional units, which I heard from Ertica people is that's what we're trying to do. If that was, I don't know whether that was something that was discussed with council initially, but I thought part of the goal of the BMR ordinance was to get more units, and the option to include CSFRA in the third option means that it's likely that we will not. So, and maybe staff can tell me whether council understood that, but I just that's not what my expectation was. So that's a comment. The third point is something that's not on the list here, but I was on the commission when this came up. The 25% BMR requirement for OHAMs came about before SB 330. And we were seeing BMR units getting turned into townhomes left and right, okay? The law changed, and guess what? All those townhomes stopped being built. The economic evaluation that was done at the time that said that the financial equivalent was 25% versus 15% was probably valid at the time when they could just do whatever the heck they wanted, okay? That's not true anymore. So I think, and it's not in line with what we've discussed here, but I think it should be brought back to council and said, should this be changed to be the same thing? Because I don't believe, I would find it hard to believe, and the developer in the room probably would agree with me, that saying that financial equivalence for 25% for a townhome or row home is still true today with the change in state law. So I think we should be looking at making that the same for everything. Again, I think it's outside of, it's something new, I guess, in the scope of this. So correct me if I'm wrong, folks, but I don't think I can propose that as an amendment at this point. But I think it should be raised back to council, because I think it was like, oh yeah, that's why we did that, and that's changed. So those are my three comments in addition to the one that I had at the beginning.
Thank you, Commissioner Cranston. Commissioner Dempsey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll simply say I'm going to be supporting this tonight. I appreciate that we've got fee reduction in this. I think that that's always going to be a valuable direction to go in. I also appreciate that we're going to be enabling sort of administrative changes to BMR going forward, so you don't always have to bring it here and listen to us for 2 hours. So it's probably a smart thing to do. And just my last nitpick is in the staff report, when you send it up to council, like, please provide a little more explanation of the one piece that you're not recommending and why, and you can do that in 2 sentences. But otherwise, planning to support.
Thank you, Commissioner Dempsey. Vice Chair Donahue.
I just have one minor comment on what Commissioner Cranston said. I think that it's still useful. There is a portion that is not a high resource area that is in the El Camino Precise Plan on the north side of El Camino between Rengsdorf and Ortega or something like that. So keeping the El Camino Precise Plan in there. I'm not discounting like your general sentiment, but technically there's a small reason to keep that in.
Other comments? Other comments? No. Okay, I guess I'll go. So I want to support this. I have a big kind of issue with the HCD map. My understanding is that the housing element, the final housing element, is like legally considered findings. I guess I don't want to just say that, but like it's based on findings. Is it a finding? I don't know, look toward, is it itself a evidentiary document that can be relied on as like a finding or something? I don't know. Like, can someone help me out on the legal side? Like,
I'm not exactly sure that I understand the question. Would you mind repeating that?
yeah, I'll elaborate. So for example, in our published housing element, there are 3 figures, figure 98 on page 334. It's called Housing Sites by Share of Non-White Population. It's a map. Another map on page 337. It's figure 99 called Housing Sites by Share of Low and Moderate Income Households. And then figure 100, Housing Sites by, I have no idea what a TCAC opportunity score is, but it's there, and it's on page 340. And, you know, they're not perfect, but I think those maps, which presumably were based on like data submitted to HCD, seem more in line with kind of how I would suggest that you know, at least a majority of our residents would also kind of experience the economic distribution and situation. And so I guess why I'm asking is since those maps are in our housing element, and I'm struggling between this clash with it's not a huge clash, but it's a minor and meaningful clash to me around the AFFH and the current criteria for what we accept as an off-site alternate compliance, which is that there is no language in there right now, as far as I understood, you know, from Mr. Chen earlier today. There's no criteria that would, whether it would preclude or at the very least invite significant scrutiny, where there's a scenario where something that, for example, in figure 99 on the housing element, where some project in the 30 to 39.9% population tract of low to moderate income could comply with their alternate mitigation or compliance, I'm sorry, by placing that off-site, you know, building in one of the tracts with, you know, the 50 to 59.9% moderate to low income. Basically, like, there's no language that I'm hearing that would say if you try to do your alternate compliance by putting an off-site building in a population tract that is lower income than the one where your market rate development will be, that there's, I guess, not more scrutiny or not more something there to either discourage that because of our AFFH, which is its own self, part of the housing element, part of our city's goals and commitments, values that our council has put forward. And so what I would like to see or hear, I guess, maybe, whether it's staff, Ms. Logue, whoever it is, if we were to say, hey, we're not just going to use that HCD map, but we're going to look at, figure 99 in the housing element, and we're not going to let you, without more scrutiny or without a higher extraction of value, we're not going to let you just put what would have otherwise been in the lower shade green into the darker shade green. We're not just going to let you do that. Right?
So let me see if I can, I honestly, I'm not quite sure I understand, but I would have to evaluate what those figures are that you're pointing to in the housing element. I'd have to go back and look at them.
Would you mind pulling it up? I see a lot of our commissioners looking at it right now.
I can tell you that even if I pull it up, I would still have to go back and do some research on what is the import of each one of those figures, where did they come from, and what data was used to create them to determine whether or not they could be used as a basis for determining where the offsite housing could be built.
That sounds
I'm
like
not saying
a very
no.
good.
Yeah.
That sounds like a very good thing to me.
Yeah, I'm not saying no. I think if I'm understanding what you'd like us to look into, I think we can look into that and explore that. I would just like some time to sort of go back. I've looked at the housing element many times, but it's very long. And so I'd like to just go back and look at those maps and compare them to the figures that housing staff used tonight and see if we can't accomplish what you are asking us to accomplish. And I don't know if Director Chen, I can't see, I can only see you on the screen. I apologize. So I don't know if he's standing up or if he has any thoughts.
Do you want me to?
And there we go. I can see him now.
Yep. Thank you very much. Yeah, I can try to take a peek at the maps too. And perhaps if I were to also try to summarize, I think it's some version of notwithstanding the maps or some such, an offsite delivery cannot cause further concentration within a, say, a low-income census tract or some such. Does that capture the concept that you're trying to get at?
Yes, and in a way that's, ideally, at minimum, more granular than that HCD map that we saw.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I think we understand the concept, and subsequent after this meeting, we can do some additional evaluation of it. Okay.
If that's the case, then, and also to the extent I do support the additional kind of language clarification, direction, what have you, around the proposal that Commissioner Cranston made earlier around qualification and scrutiny, that side, to the extent that I would definitely be supporting this with the addition of that additional review of, as Mr. Wayne Chen put it, offsite alternate compliances wouldn't exacerbate, the concentration of, like low-income areas in our city, to the extent that the rest of my commissioners as colleagues would also support that, then I'll put that forward. I think we have Commissioner Subramanian on the queue.
Chair, if I may offer my thoughts on the three figures that you pointed out. I believe what they're trying to do, in my understanding of it, and certainly staff, please correct me, is that they are putting or demonstrating the housing element sites within the context of these three different sort of demographic study maps. And as I understand it, these are demographic study maps at a given point in time, meaning that they might evolve. And I think the one that perhaps changes the fastest is the third one of the three you pointed out. So the TCAC map is essentially pointing out what TCAC puts out as high opportunity or high resource rich areas. And I believe those are updated annually. And so the reason that the third figure looks very different from the map that staff put up on the screen is because this map is from a few years ago, and I guess in the latest evaluation, the state has updated those to represent what they believe are resource-rich areas, which is sounding like it's all of the city. So that, in my opinion, is just to show us the context of the housing element sites vis-a-vis these different demographic status across the city. It doesn't in any way diminish the point you made about ensuring that there is not a concentration of BMR housing in a certain part of town. So that's just the point I wanted to make.
Thank you, because just to take a moment to respond to that. Always, I would rather give like broader direction to staff than more specific, which me as a not expert, the more specific I get, probably the worse things would get. And so to that extent, just to be clear, I was referencing those maps as examples of just the ability for more granularity in how we view concentrations of income in our city. And so the current proposal that I'm adding on top of Commissioner Cranston's is, I believe as Mr. Wayne Chen put it, that staff go explore additional opportunities to ensure that alternate mitigations as off-site would not lead to the furtherance of low-income concentrations in our city or take otherwise appropriate measures. Okay, Commissioner Cranston.
Sure, but I just want to make it clear that I view that as an and. Okay, the rest of the things in here are one or the other or the other. That's not an or. What he's suggesting, I think it's an and. So it's not. It needs to be part of whatever criteria, whether any of these here. And I think he's saying thumbs up. So I just want to make sure it's not seen as a separate independent. It's an addition across the board for all of these options.
Any other commentary, questions, points of deliberation? Otherwise, would we need to modify? I'm down to make a motion to the extent that we do or don't need to. Do we need to modify the language to reflect the current thinking around qualification and further analysis on concentration of low-income tracts, or is that just like added direction on top of the actual text that is in the script?
If it's a majority decision, then somebody will have to make a motion, state the recommendation, and then we can take a vote on that.
So then it would be something, just in terms of the logistical element of how that would go, it would be reading the whole text and then also saying, and we recommend that, et cetera. Okay, cool. Then in that case, unless there's other deliberation, like Commissioner Cranston, would you like to? No.
If the city attorney can suggest the language that I use, I'm happy to read it, okay? We talked for a while, but how do you want me to word this? Jennifer?
I don't have a suggestion at the moment for your motion. I mean, I think that I have a general understanding of what you want.
Okay, I'll make a motion and I'll take a crack at it, and then Ms. Logue, if things go haywire, then you can gently guide me. And then I think do we have a second? Or am I on an island? Second? Commissioner Cranston is seconding. And then, okay, cool. All right. Then I will make a motion that the Environmental Planning Commission recommend the City Council, 1, adopt an ordinance of the City Council of the City of Mountain View, amending Chapter 36 zoning, Article 14, Division 2 residential development, below market rate housing program of the Mountain View City Code to modify the below market rate program and add section 36.40.32 governing graduated fee reduction for small projects, and finding that these code amendments are not subject to the California Environmental Quality Act as recommended by the Environmental Planning Commission, to be read in title, further reading waived, attachment 1 to the staff report, with the added recommendation that language be included to assure the provision of qualified partners as part of alternate compliance proposals submitted by developers, and that additional analysis evaluation for the potential implementation or suggestion to council of assuring that off-site alternate compliance tracks do not exacerbate low-income concentrations in the city of Mountain View. Is that okay?
That was clear.
Okay, thank you. That is the motion on the floor. Mr. Clerk, can we put that to a vote?
The motion carries, 6 yea and 1 absent.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Okay, we will proceed to item 7, commission staff announcements, update requests, and committee reports. No action will be taken on questions raised by the commission at this time. Staff, or Ms. Pincholi, do you have any, or anyone else, announcements, including potentially the next meeting
If
date?
nobody else has it, the March 18th EPC meeting is going to be canceled because we don't have any items on the agenda. So most probably EPC will reconvene in April.
Okay, thank you very much. In that case, sorry, question. Yep, Commissioner Cranston.
Question for staff. It was my recollection there are attendance requirements for commissioners. Do you recall what those are?
I don't recall, but we can bring it back. But yes, you're right, there are attendance requirements for commissioners.
Okay, no more questions, announcements. This meeting is adjourned at 9:22 p.m. Thank you.